Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Kevin Herman. He's a senior business architecture advisor with Employment and Social Development Canada, or ESDC. He's been spearheading the business architecture practice for 6 years as part of. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for Transformation Management and Employment and Social Development Canada. Kevin has supported many transformation efforts within the department over his 21-year career as a developer, IT project manager, business analyst, and business architect, which includes employment insurance claims processing automation, enabling service renewal, and Service Canada's overall service transformation plans and initiatives. I'll turn things over to Kevin, and the topic of his presentation will be linking business strategy with digital transformation through capabilities. Kevin?
Thank you very much, and it's good to be here. So I've looked at a couple of the past presentations that's been going on this afternoon, so there's going to be a theme here. A lot of focus around capabilities, a very good presentation from University of Ottawa. So I'll probably be building on that a little bit. Hopefully there won't be too much repetition, but again, repetition is the key to learning. So hopefully that'll be good for everyone here to get a feel for capabilities and how we can use it to then accelerate our transformations that we want to execute within the Government of Canada and beyond. So just to start a little bit, I really want to focus here again on how we take strategies and how we link that to our digital transformation. We talk a lot about, again, what we want to do for digital transformation. But again, are we clear on how that actually allows us to achieve our objectives and outcomes? I want to talk about how we take capabilities and actually use that as a tool for us to communicate our strategies so that they'll be more easily executed. So just to start off with something a little bit more lighthearted, we have a lot of great big ideas, things that we want to accomplish. We also have a lot of things that we're being pressure from our clients, our customers, et cetera, that we have to meet. So we have all sorts of great technology. So why can't we meet this demand? What is the problem that we have? What are we missing exactly? We talk about digital transformation. What is it exactly? And how do we actually get there? So I'll talk a little bit in my experience and probably working within the government for quite a few years and being part of many transformations. I've seen a couple of, let's say, patterns or anti-patterns that happen when we start talking about digital transformation. One of those is we have a high level of vision and unclear direction. We have really great strategies. They're easy to communicate, but then what does that mean and how do we execute upon those because they're not quite clear? We also see a lot of transformation in silos, many business lines, all trying to transform at the same time, all trying to deliver on the strategy. Again, if it's unclear and it doesn't really match, how do I combine these business lines together towards a wholesome transformation for my organization? And then leading with technology. We often see the solutions looking for problems being IT first. And yes, we do want to bring in innovation and make sure that IT is driving innovation and strategy as much as possible. But without having a clear understanding of the business need or the client need, how can we do so? So first, I'll focus a little bit on the first pattern, which is the high level vision with unclear direction. And I learned long ago that having a presentation without a Dilbert cartoon is like having spaghetti without meatballs. So just something a little funny when we talk about strategic planning and what it is. Again, we see a lot of people talking about strategy, but when it comes down to actual execution, it tends to fall apart quite a bit. And so we have really high level communication for our vision and where we want to be, but then it gets a little bit harder to action that very high level strategy that we have. How do we bring it down to the execution level? We also missing a unified understanding of what good or done is. So how we put in the proper measures in place to make sure that we're actually advancing the strategy and that we know what we need to do in order to advance that strategy. We're also often lacking detail to develop common understanding of what is needed to get there. So again, do we have the right amount of detail so that every business line can understand what their part is and how they can contribute towards that transformation that you're looking for? And then often this results in missing or disconnected or overlapping initiatives and solutions in an organization. So we'll see many people doing a lot of things, and it's very questionable as to whether it's actually contributing towards a strategy or not, because we don't have that linkage. We can't see it. And then we end up seeing that in the IT world and creating those IT silos in line with a lot of those business silos. So speaking of silos, talk about transformation silos. So we have many business lines usually within our organization, and within employment and social development, we have many. We have probably over 40 plus business lines, different programs and services that they're offering. So there's a very wide variety of business lines to choose from. And we have to somehow find a way to align the way that they work towards a common vision, especially when it comes to Service Canada and how we're providing service to Canadians. So when we have lines of business, they often have individual operational needs. So obviously those are always in contention with your strategy and where you want to be. How do we know what they're doing versus where we want to go? They often have different vocabulary between them. So they use different terms for what they do. Even if they might be the same thing, we refer to them differently. They might also be at different levels of maturity. So how do we know where they are at as far as getting towards that end state that we're looking for? They're all at different levels. So how can we treat them all the same and say they really have the same strategy?
On the presentation.
They also sometimes have no idea what is available across the enterprise to them. So they might have similar problems, but they really don't know what it is that they can use to address those problems. A, because they can't communicate them properly, and B, because there's no real inventory or way to link that back to their need as far as an inventory of what is available from a technology perspective or solution perspective. And then often leading with technology. So we see this a lot where it's tail wagging the dog, where we have technology comes up with great ideas, great innovation, but then we just try to fit our business within that innovation and not being clear on what it is that we actually want to try and accomplish. So you end up with the problem of solutions, looking for problems. So we can develop great solutions, and then they tend to fizzle out once we try to implement them into the business and don't end up achieving the results that we're looking for. And you end up with a lot of overlapping IT investments that happen. Again, going back to the silo conversation, again, if we don't have a clear vision for everyone, a horizontal vision, how can we make sure that all of our IT investments are actually supporting that common vision as well? We also end up with a fuzzy understanding of business and client needs. And those could be the current ones, or they could be emerging. So again, talking about more of our strategic needs, where we want to be versus what we are. If we don't have an understanding of that, how can we ever talk about change and what we need to put in place to support that change? And then automation of inefficient processes. Again, when we take a technology first approach and we try to fit business as is into technology, we're really just looking at automating many processes that probably should have been changed years and years ago. And so it's always best to take the business first approach. Look at how the business, what it wants to accomplish, everything in the landscape of what it wants to change, and then pick the right tools to fit that. And then this results in multiple large scale and sometimes never ending IT investments with little to no value delivered. So I don't know if anyone relates, but I've often seen these sorts of never-ending projects for, again, bringing in some solution with very fuzzy results that they're trying to achieve and requirements that are even more fuzzy. So how do we stop this sort of never-ending investment? And how do we get more targeted with the IT that we implement?
This presentation has moved on this event.
So we'll talk a little bit about how we're going to bridge the gap that we have between our strategy and the execution or our transformation that we're looking for. So we always start with our mandate, our vision, our strategy. Again, why do we exist? And for whom do we exist? And where do we want to be in the future? And then we have the digital transformation, and this is the how. And so we tend to focus a lot on the digital transformation, coming up with great ideas about how we can possibly advance services. But we have to keep an eye on where we want to be. What are the objectives and outcomes of the organization? What is the experience that we want to have for our clients at the end of the day? So this is where we're going to be introducing the concept of capabilities, using that to actually identify the what. So again, creating that clear understanding in between the why and the how. Although we do want to keep in mind that there always will be this feedback loop between digital transformation and the strategy when it comes to innovation. We want to make sure that we're not stagnating and that we're using the most up-to-date technologies at all time. So we will have this consistent loop of where we're always looking at new technologies, feeding our new strategy, which then gets expressed through the capabilities that we need to develop or improve in order to deliver on it. So I'll start out by talking about what is a business capability. And I think if anybody has attended the University of Ottawa, they've seen this presented already, but we'll go over it again. So to talk a little bit about business capability, it is what a business needs to be able to do in order to deliver on their mandate or achieve their strategy, not how it's done. So very much focused on the what. A business capability is an ability. It's provided by people. So employees, business units, partners, or service providers external to the organization. It follows processes.
I'll start out by
talking about
business capability.
It's leveraging and creating information and data, and it's enabled by technology. So all of these create the dimensions of the capability that we're looking for, essentially saying what parts of the operating model allow me to have this ability. And then each capability is uniquely defines common business building blocks. And I think that's a very important concept to look at as the actual building blocks for the organization to achieve our objectives or deliver on the outcomes that we're looking for. So if we think about it as Lego pieces, we have this great amount of Lego pieces in our organization. How do we group these together towards certain outcomes? I can use similar ones for building many different things. And I want to identify what those commonalities are, but I also want to be able to understand what those pieces do and how they might fit and how they might enable that end outcome that I'm looking for. So why do we need business capabilities? So as mentioned, we want to have that common vocabulary. Again, when we have multiple business lines that are all trying to communicate with each other and all using a very different language for talking about these things, how do we get them to use the same language? So business capabilities becomes a way for having that common language. It also allows for discovery of commonalities and gaps across those lines of business. So again, we have a common vocabulary, but now we can also use that to map to say, okay, well, this is where we want to be. This is where we are. This is how we're performing, and map that against the capabilities so that we can use that to talk to each other about where we want to be. And we also provides a baseline for horizontal strategic planning, change management, impact analysis, again, giving that common reference for us to use for doing that sort of work. And then also becomes a basis for gap analysis. So I'm using that as my reference for understanding that this is the capability that I want. What is the gap from the current way that that is enabled versus the target state that I'm looking for? Use that for the gap analysis, and then developing business requirements in line with that then can be used for doing much more detailed level requirements for the solutions that might enable that gap or address that gap. Let's talk a little bit about business capability models. So those who are in the Government of Canada might be aware that we have our Government of Canada business capability model, which is a good reference for us to show some alignment across the various silos that exist in the departments and agencies across the government. Within our own organization, we've also created our own business capability model. We've taken some different paths. We've been working on business capability model now for probably over 10 years now. And so it's definitely evolved over time. But again, it's much more specific to the capabilities that we need within our organization. So definitely within our context. But these are all very good references to use if you need to build your own. So starting from the GCBCM, building off of it and becoming more specific to what your organization does or needs to be able to do. So maybe just some tips. I'm not going to go into specific methodologies. There are quite a few and many examples to draw from, as the ones I had just mentioned. But perhaps just a little bit more generally, what you need to consider when you're building your business capability model. So we want to focus on the essential elements and activities of the business. So you really want to get down to those core atomic activities, because really we want to talk about things at that level. We don't want to talk about things generically. We don't want to talk about our overall process. we want to talk about the specific capabilities that we have within those processes. So we do have to get down into those details. Then we also have to make sure that we're not creating duplication. So we want to normalize those as much as possible and create it in such a way that you aren't going to have that kind of duplication across capabilities, because then it starts to defeat the purpose of identifying those common capabilities or those things that you want to have commonly across the business. Also make sure you use the language of the business. So yes, as I mentioned, many business lines of business will have their own way of talking and their own language, but we need to at least use that language to our advantage. So we want to find where there's ways that we can have common language across the organization and use that, and not use language that no one is really familiar with or doesn't use in their common vernacular and can't relate to. So we want to make sure that there is some relation to the business so that they can use it and understand it. And then we also want to be implementation agnostic. Again, this is supposed to be about the what and not about the how. And often when we see business capability models as they advance, they tend to look, let's say, a little bit more like organizational models and looking at functions and services, which can be good as far as communicating with the business and what they do. What this can also do, though, is create this duplication that I'm speaking of. So you can see that many functions can obviously have the same capabilities across them. So when you start to get down into the lower levels, you might see that come to light. You also want to avoid having any sort of IT type capabilities in there. Again, having an automated capability is still a business capability, and it's one that's being enabled by technology. So we want to make sure that we're not, again, showing things that are specifically IT related in there either. So being very much above and beyond the actual implementation. Now let's talk a little bit more practically about how we're supporting strategy to execution with capabilities. So again, what we often see is that we have this high-level vision, driven by our mandate, any issues, risks, opportunities, innovation, feedback that we receive from clients or employees, et cetera, and we use this to develop our strategy. And so we may develop a set of outcomes that we want to achieve at a high level. We may assign some KPIs or measures that we want to assign to that, and a bunch of initiatives that are put in place or ones that may already be in place. And so how do we create some alignment? Often you'll see where there's some loose alignment between those initiatives, what they are trying to accomplish, and they show that they will be trying to accomplish very much the same things, but we have no tangible way to look at how it might actually do that. So this is where we start using capabilities. When we look at the outcomes, and really, what is it that we want to measure? We start to discuss what is it that we actually have to address or build in order to achieve that outcome that we're looking for. That goes back to looking at, again, if we're talking about an issue or a risk, where does that issue exist? Getting down into the root cause of that issue. So there's a lot of work that happens. It's not just a simple arrow as you see in this diagram, but it takes a lot of work to get down to identifying what is the actual core issue and how might I actually address that base issue that I'm looking for to achieve this outcome. Then once I've identified the business capability, I can build off of that and start building business requirements around the actual gaps. So again, talking about how I might achieve or address that gap via expressing what it is that I need in order to achieve the outcome. And then talking about how we might operationalize that capability. So more in the lines of a solution, a more business solution, or an operational capability is the context that we're using here, where we talk about the components that actually need to be put into place in order to address this requirement, to build this capability, to achieve this outcome. Then that allows us then to link that to specific initiatives that will be developing that capability and then delivering these specific components that we outline within here, whether it be a technology component, an information component, organization, or process. So again, we want to identify capability, what gaps in capability need to be addressed, and identification of the enabling elements of the capability in the operating model. So a bit of a practical example, and I've kept it very simple so that it's easy to express, because it could get very complicated, especially when you're dealing with a very, let's say, wide and deep strategy. I'll focus on a singular issue in this case. So we may have an issue where clients are not able to have requests resolved at the first point of contact. So they're being bumped around when they call, and they have to contact 5 people before they get a resolution to their question. So we'll think about our strategy and how we might want to address that. And so we think about an outcome that we want to have, which is we want service agents to have information available to address requests at first point of contact, because we probably addressed at this point that the root cause is that they don't have the information they need to actually address those requests. And then we will measure the change or the improvement by looking at increased first contact resolutions. So keeping this in mind that, again, we're looking to achieve some form of extra information or making that available to our agents, we'll then talk about a specific capability. And there are probably more than this one, but we'll focus on knowledge management, might be the specific capability we want to focus on here to address that. So now that we've identified that capability, we talk about a requirement for that capability. So how do we want to configure it so that it can achieve this outcome? And so we'll talk about the ability that we actually want. So it's ability to quickly access business knowledge pertinent to the service request. So this creates an instance of this capability that we need to have in our operating model. And the specific things that we need to address in order to achieve that might be in the technology realm. We would have to introduce a new knowledge management tool set and integrate that with, again, a CRM. And then from an information perspective, we might want to take any service knowledge that we have. Obviously, we want to store that within the knowledge management tool, but we also want to link it to request type, which is going to be very important for us to be able to make it easy for the agents to access. So this gives us a bit of context about the things that we need to deliver towards this building this capability to then achieve that outcome. And therefore, we can have an initiative put in place. It may be an existing initiative where you might create one specifically towards developing that capability. In this case, we might have an overall one that is looking at building a call center platform, of which this would only be one capability that it might deliver. So the idea here is that we start from, again, the problem, the issue, our strategy, and the outcomes to make sure that our execution is being outcome driven as much as possible. And then if we look back, then we can make sure that we have increased clarity of our needs and the enterprise impacts they're going to have, because we're using this at the enterprise level. So this might be a specific problem with one business line, but we might find that other business lines have a very similar problem to which this is building a solution that could be reused. So what? So we have capabilities, and this is often, I've heard in the past, you show a nice capability heat map, and then the question is, so what? What is this going to show me, or what is this going to tell me? So what we want from capabilities is that clear understanding of what needs to be introduced or improved. So we can all agree on what that thing is. Once we agree on it, then we can put action towards it. Then it's about traceability between the operating model, so our current operating model or our target operating model, and the desired results or outcomes. And that's also going to guide the project output. So what does the project deliver is going to be in line with what we want to achieve and the capabilities that we want to build. And we also know what areas of the operating model are going to be impacted as a result of that. And then it provides good context for true business requirements. And often we'll see requirements that come through that are very much focused on the user aspect. So what does that user want to get out of a specific piece of technology? But what is it that the business wants to achieve? What is the gap in their business that they're trying to address? So using capabilities to actually express those business requirements becomes an extremely good tool. And we also have the ability to view a single change in the context of the enterprise. So again, having that enterprise view, because we're taking this capability model and we can take various initiatives and various strategies, and we can see where different capabilities are being impacted and then find common solutions, or even design where the business needs to collaborate or where they need to work more closely together and integrate. Now to talk a little bit about the broader perspective. So very much focusing on capabilities as far as how do we use them for identifying the strategic intent that we're looking for. What do we do with that after? Because there's more than one view that we can create. So we can look at investment and initiative views as a way of getting some insights into where we're spending our money from a capability perspective. And we can compare that to the strategic priorities. So are we putting our money where we say we want to focus our strategic intent? We can also use it to identify capability development overlaps. So if we have multiple investments or multiple initiatives coming through, we can then look back and say, okay, well, why are all these concentrating on a single capability? Should we create possibly one initiative for building this capability for the rest of the organization? Other views that you can produce is also performance, criticality, and risk views. So looking more again at how does the actual business operate in relation to that capability. And that would help you then to identify capabilities that are of the most concern. So there might be ones that have particular risks associated with them. You might also see that there's some strategic priority against the operational priorities. So where do we have high use of a capability where it's being used across multiple processes, and therefore it becomes a linchpin for our business. So if we don't have strategic priority on the most important capabilities, it starts to raise questions and starts to challenge our strategy. And we might also compare strategic priority to any problematic or risk or at-risk capabilities that might exist. And that can go down to any level of risk, even if we were to look at the IT level. We talk a lot about aging IT. If we want to drill up and say, okay, well, we have this IT that supports these capabilities, then I can start saying that, well, if that IT is aging, it then presents a risk wherever that capability is being used across the organization. And there's more. So a lot of other perspectives can be built around capabilities as well that make it even more powerful than just looking at the capabilities themselves. So linking those capabilities to value streams or processes or client journeys. So again, much more about the behavior aspects of the organization. So what capabilities do we use and towards what purpose? Why do we use them? And what impact does that have on our value delivery or the client experience that we have? So that when we identify issues with client experience, doing journey mapping, et cetera, how do we actually bring that down to the actual capabilities that we need to actually build or address? Also linking it to organization or business units. So who has the capabilities that we have that are in our capability model, and who enables those capabilities right now? That helps us to identify where there's possible overlaps. It also helps us to identify who will be impacted by specific changes to those capabilities, who might gain value from them as well. So it helps from a change management perspective and an impact analysis perspective. Information and data. So it gives us some insight into how information and data is created by and flows to and from those capabilities. And then of course, applications and technology. So where does IT support the capabilities or doesn't? Maybe we want to expand the IT portfolio to different capabilities where it doesn't currently exist, where things may be ad hoc currently. Where are we automating capabilities? If we want to increase automation, we can also compare that against some of the views that I mentioned earlier. Again, if it's some of our more important or highly used capabilities, perhaps that was where automation would have the biggest impact on the organization, may also carry the biggest risk. So it becomes part of that, that decision. And then we also talk about what capabilities are at risk from aging IT, as I had mentioned. So that's something else that we can look at. So taking things that happen within application portfolio management, where they're looking at aging IT and new IT as it comes, and start mapping that against what the business actually wants to do. So I'll talk a little bit about ESDC's specific journey with capabilities and where we've gone with our overall business architecture practice, but I'll focus mostly on the capabilities themselves. So we've been working within business architecture in some form since 2007. And there's been a clear maturing of the practice as we go. It started within the CIO, so there was a very IT-centric view of capabilities. We developed a capability model that was based on Australia's Department of Human Services business capability model and made some adjustments to it to match our business and our language. And then we used it to support a lot of more IT functions. So again, supporting application portfolio management, having those views of aging IT, also using it to develop CIO dashboards where we look at where IT investment is happening and then use it for prioritization. And then we've also applied the business capability model towards to assess impacts and coordinate those IT investments that support architecture review committees. Then there was, in 2016, we moved over to the transformation management branch. And so as part of that, we became much more focused on transformation and looking at the business much more closely. So we applied our business capability model against some larger transformation initiatives and their planning. So starting from the front, what is it that those large scale transformations want to achieve, and using capability language to talk about what is going to be impacted or what needs to be improved. We also developed the next iteration. So through doing this and looking at the types of capabilities that we need to develop, we had to make some changes to our capability model to address those things that needed to be developed in our organization and to make sure that they were being communicated properly. And we also talked about how we use capabilities and started linking that into enterprise requirements management. So how do we link that into building clear requirements that then allow us to action many of these transformation plans that we have? Now what we're working on is towards being a strategic enabler for the department. So this is something we're building right now. We've taken another new version of our capability model. We've taken to leveraging the business architecture body of knowledge, many of the standards and principles that it has in building our business capability model so that we can leverage some of these reference models that they have, and then leveraging a greater community of business architects. Also moving from project focus and focusing more on portfolio and enterprise level strategic planning. So working with those business planners who are looking at the overall enterprise and also specific portfolios and helping them plan using capabilities, but also other tools within our business architecture toolkit. Also for developing a strategy execution framework. So an overall framework. So we talk about using capabilities and then using them perhaps in an ad hoc manner. How can we make this a repeatable process that we can follow for actually developing strategy in a clear manner and then linking that to the execution or implementation? And then also, as I mentioned, mapping those capabilities to the other various parts of the operating model that will give us all sorts of other intel that we need to develop strategy in the future or to make key decisions for transformation. So some examples of some heat maps that we might create within our context. Again, I talk about doing a lot of mapping to projects and looking at investments. This creates a view where we can look at where we are investing our time and compare that against where we want to be and what capabilities we want to develop. So where we see from our own organization, there's many investments that are happening from a client management, submission management, information management perspective, which tells me that we're really focusing on how we gather, manage, and gain insights from client information and data. So that is a very important part of the way we deliver services to Canadians. We also see many secondary investments, which are looking at client interactions, processing, and then management of workforce and workload. So how do we then support that service delivery? We also have some strategic heat maps. So we have an overall transformation plan that we've developed, and we identified capabilities that need to be developed. We also have many initiatives that have been put into place or had already existed, and we want to make sure that they're aligning towards that strategy. So we created a map where we've highlighted all the capabilities, at least at a high level, that we want to develop, and then mapped how those specific strategic initiatives might be contributing towards that. And we see where there's a lot of clustering that then exists. So the question becomes, are we overlapping here, or is there actually some area of integration or dependency that exists? And through the analysis, we were able to find that actually there is a great integration and dependency that does exist between these initiatives because they are focusing on different aspects of the capability. And so that they need to coordinate together and not work in silos, so that we already have set some sort of dependency framework or model to follow as we execute on this strategy. And I mentioned that we were talking about how we leverage this for requirements management and the definition of requirements. And so we've worked within our project management office to put in a repeatable process for actually identifying what it is that projects are trying to accomplish, how they leverage strategic, or how they're going to contribute towards strategic objectives, what capabilities they're trying to develop, and then expressing that again through requirements. So we've developed this as a common template for how we might identify all of these things for specific initiatives. And then, as I mentioned, we're trying to build a strategy to execution model. So a repeatable process for how we might define strategy, link it to capabilities, create designs around those capabilities, then develop initiatives to deliver them, and then have solutions, and then also the measurement of success. So have we actually achieved the objectives and outcomes that we're looking for? If not, then we need to go back. And this is where, again, those agile sorts of practices can come into play. for failing fast or for delivering on those objectives in a much more quicker manner. So in conclusion, when we apply business capabilities to our strategic planning, we improve our understanding of strategic direction. We provide a common view of required changes and allow for horizontal design. And we provide a clear focus for technology and implementation decisions. So addressing many of those pitfalls that we have and achieving that digital transformation that we're looking for in our organization. Thank you very much for having me. And again, if there's any questions, please let me know.
Kevin, a great presentation. Thank you so very much. We have a couple of questions here. So let me pull up the first one, and I would encourage everyone else, if they have a question to ask of Kevin, please do so. So here's one for you, Kevin. How have you integrated the capabilities into business process mapping? What are your recommendations for organizations that are just starting to use a BCM and has historically used business process maps?
Yep. So within our organization and specifically within business architecture, we've been focusing on the use of value streams. So again, we've been aligning or using the business architecture body of knowledge very heavily. And they do suggest using value streams as not only giving that higher level view of processes, because we know that processes can be extremely detailed. There can be thousands of them across the organization. But how do we use that to actually to communicate where capabilities are actually being used and towards what ends? So being very value focused. And then I've also found that working with business lines, it becomes a very easy communication tool for them to identify where issues exist or where they might want to improve. So it gives that process view without getting into the nitty-gritty details. Now, that being said, we have had many conversations with business analysts on how we might take the actual business processes, how they're being modeled, and then link that back, being a component of the value stream, but then also how are those capabilities being used within that. We've used that within our impact analysis. So we've used a common, where you have a process classification framework or a PCF, using that as a way to identify common processes at a lower level, and then how those might be linked to the capabilities as well. So that's another way that we can go. So again, it's all about the level of detail that you want to work at, but I definitely suggest looking at value streams as something that's a little bit more easier chunk to bite off. Because you are working at that higher level, very much focused on value, which then helps you from that strategic discussion perspective.
So for these large type of capital investments, can you talk a little bit about the business case and where that fits in and what some of the key points to consider when developing a business case might be?
Sure. Yeah, and this is something from a business architecture perspective we've been trying to promote heavily. When we were first called in to look at many initiatives, and obviously they're developing business cases and proposals, and we look at them, and obviously the quality was very poor in many cases. They would talk a lot about the tools that they wanted to implement, but very little about what it is that they actually wanted to accomplish, and not in a clear way. And we would be expected to talk about capabilities and what the impacts would be. And in many cases, to be honest, we didn't know what capabilities were at play. All we knew is that there was a specific tool that they wanted to procure and that there were some improvements to business processes that they wanted to make. We didn't know why they wanted to make them, and we didn't know what that meant from an enterprise perspective. So we've been trying to also influence the development of these proposals and these business cases by making use of capabilities, but also introducing, as I had shown in much of that requirements management model, is how do we actually define our problems, define our outcomes, our objectives much more clearly, and link that to the capabilities that we want to develop. Then the solutioning can happen, as opposed to having solutioning up front, which we usually saw within the business cases. So this is where we're trying to influence more of our project management office, but also at the strategic tables, where we can talk about what it is that we want to accomplish before we even talk about creating projects or developing business cases.
Okay, thank you. And be a bit old school perhaps with this question, but how important is the project champion, and who should be that champion? How do you get a champion?
So I'm assuming for a project itself, or for
yeah.
Okay, so for a project itself, again, that's always the difficult part, because again, project management might not be as strong in some areas as others. But I find when you work directly, and this is something that we've always taken as a way of working. So there's a model for the way that we work is we always look at engagement over templates. So we don't create templates, pass them over and say, okay, fill these in. I know you don't know what this means, but it means a lot to us. So we try to avoid that situation and actually work directly with project managers and say, we're here to help you communicate what you want to achieve as much and clearly as possible. So we act as an enabler. So it's easy to get a champion from a project perspective when you're telling them that you're A, going to help them, and B, that you're going to make it very clear what they're doing, which is probably going to help them get funding, and B, be successful. So this is, I think, it's very easy to get a champion in that case.
I guess one of the challenges too is to hold on to that champion for the duration of the project. People come and go, don't they?
That's right. That's right. And so, that's where it's good to have that centralized area that's providing that sort of support and has that expertise so that it doesn't always sit within the project manager themselves and they always have to build those competencies. Having that centralized competency then allows us to take different project managers as they come in, show them the types of process that they can follow, what types of tools that they can be using, and then help them through the process. I think that's the best way to avoid getting stuck. I know within our organization, we can have probably 100 projects in a year. So that's a lot of project managers that we need to reach out to. We don't have a large team. So we tend to prioritize a little bit on the projects. So we tend to focus more on the ones that are more strategic, ones that are transformational, as opposed to ones that might be more tactical, that are only making slight changes to the existing operating model.
So how important is an off-ramp or off-ramps? In particular, you reach a point in the project where everyone realizes you're not heading in the right direction. This is just not going to work. What do you do?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know if I can answer that one, but I can tell you that something we're trying to do is to, again, have that thinking up front as much as possible. So again, being very clear about our objectives and outcomes, and then what it is that we want to develop, and then having that high level solutioning so that we can really test our, again, you talk about testing your assumptions. How can you test those assumptions before you even start a project to begin with? And so I think that's very much in line with where we want to be as an organization. We don't want to have these projects that go on for 4 or 5 years, and then it becomes very difficult to end those projects because there has been such a large investment that's been made. So how do we inform those decisions up front, or give us the best tools that we can actually explore the best way to identify what would be successful and what won't be successful? So I'm not sure I can tell you the best off-ramp. Definitely not my area of expertise, but I'm trying to avoid having the need for it, I think, and doing those things up front.
Okay. Thank you. We have time for a few more questions. There's one that just came in. How easy is it to involve the ESDC business stakeholders into management of capabilities versus services?
Extremely difficult. That is not an easy thing to do. And that's a journey that we're still on, to be honest. We do have very good champions within our transformation management branch. So that's an ADM level champion. So that's good. And he definitely has many conversations with his fellow ADMs. And so they're always talking about how they can improve capabilities. It is being used in the vernacular. Now, does everybody know what that means to them? And are they using it actively within their planning? No, they aren't. Yeah. So that's something we're trying to build through some of the more major initiatives that we have. Develop that muscle, show some quick wins, some wins that we've had as a result of following that process. And so each time we go around, it's always a circle. And I find this is the way government works, right? As time works in a circle, is you have these great big things that you want to achieve. You achieve a little bit, the time will come again, and you'll always gain a little bit more. So, we've had a long journey with our business architecture practice, and I think we still have a long way to go, obviously with the size of our organization. If you're dealing in a smaller organization, you might see that happening much quicker. Then again, the pressures might be much higher in a smaller organization, and the resources you have available to you might be lower. So there's always going to be challenges, I think. As far as a champion is definitely key for the approach, and then showing people the results. So not talking so much in the clouds about this is the theory around it, but us actually show you how it works and what result that might gain for you.
Thank you. Here's another good question. How do you refresh your BCM and keep it evergreen? And is this done in consort with the business?
Yeah. So this is something where we're always seeing new capabilities, and it can be, and what we've seen, it's not necessarily that we have new capabilities in the organization that we didn't have before, but it's ones that had never been a focus or had been articulated before. So one thing we've done with our new capability model actually is, again, trying to take a much more principled approach with it. Again, using the business architecture body of knowledge and the Business Architecture Guild as a guide. They have a method that they use where they're using more business object-based capabilities. The great thing about that is it actually takes away a lot of duplication, but allows you then to build off of those capabilities and looking at those business objects. What are the activities that we perform against them? And so when you identify a new activity, it becomes much easier to add on capabilities. What we've had in the past where we focus on specific business functions, it can be very difficult to add in new things because now we've created this sort of communications view and people said, yeah, this is what I do. But then when you want to add something else that they don't do into there, then it becomes very difficult to communicate. So again, trying to separate from that implementation makes it much easier then to add capabilities and to refresh that model moving forward. At least that's what we've discovered.
Here's one more for you, Kevin. What type of tool or software do you use to track capabilities, their requirements, and their ties to processes?
Yeah. So we're currently using QualityAware, which I think a lot of people in the government of Canada are using. So that's more of our architecture tool set where there's modeling, but also as our architecture repository. So we put most of our business architecture within there. That being said, I would say the business process area is very poor. There's a lot more process models that exist in other tools and other repositories, but we've tried to create linkages to those things so that we can keep it consistent, so that we always have some reference to those processes, just perhaps not the specific models and details of those processes. But also requirements, we've captured certain level business requirements. But again, this is where the difficulty comes in because you have multiple people who have used different tools across the organization for capturing requirements, which could also be Word or Excel, which makes it very difficult then for you to link that to your common repository. And with a large organization, that has been a challenge for us, for sure. So I would say our intentions are to do that within a common tool set, or at least to have integrated tool sets. But again, that's still a journey for us as well.
Okay, great. Excellent questions, outstanding answers. Kevin, I'd like to thank you on behalf of everyone for just an outstanding, informative, very practical presentation that I'm sure we're all going to be able in some shape or form apply to what we're doing. So once again, thank you very much. Thanks to all who attended. And this is the last session of the day. We're not going to have the wrap up as was originally planned, but hope to see you all then tomorrow morning when we start off at 8 o'clock in the morning. So once again, thanks a lot. Have a great evening. Kevin, all the best.